Greetings, this is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're going to go through the third issue of Weird Tales, published in May 1923. So the first thing I noticed with this issue is that it has a lot fewer pages. It's got 124, whereas the previous ones had 196. The magazine changed its format to the standard pulp size, which is about 6.5 by 9.5 inches, to a larger format, which is about 8.5 by 11.25 inches. You'll also see that there's been a switch to a 3-column format instead of 2 columns. So we have the kind of cover we expect from a pulp magazine, at least in terms of theme. The art style is still a little bit old school, but it's only the third issue. We see a man standing in front of a witch at her cauldron. She seems to be doing some sort of spell. There are strange fumes coming out of the cauldron and also from some braziers that are scattered around them. I quite like this cover. It's very moody. But let's see now if the fiction is just as good. So the table of content tells us there's 19 short stories, 2 novelettes, and again there are 2 two-part stories. There's the second part of one story and the first part of another. Let's get into it and look at what we have. And what we have for the first story is interior art. This is the first issue of Weird Tales that has interior art. Now, most of it is uncredited, but 2 of them have a signature that reads Heitman, same signature as the cover art, so it's reasonable to assume that all of them were done by the same person because they're very much in the same style of rendering. The first story, called The Moon Terror, is about a series of earthquakes that have shaken the entire world. Of course, only one scientist named Ferdinand Gresham has the solution in order to save the world from what threatens it, and what threatens it is an ancient secret society from somewhere in China that believes the Earth used to have 2 moons, and they've determined that they shall make a new moon by causing all these earthquakes and causing a chunk of the Earth to fly away and go into orbit. Of course, there'll be some adventures. Some of the scenes are a bit cringeworthy, but it's relatively fast-paced. So will the great scientist and his companion manage to save the world? Well, you'll have to read the end in the next issue to find out. The next story is called The Secret Fear, and it concerns a policeman who finds a dead body near the docks, and it turns out that it's a man who's very afraid of apes. Again, we have apes appearing in one of these stories. But it turns out he wasn't killed by an ape. He was killed by a heart attack caused by a would-be thief grabbing him from behind. And the would-be thief has very hairy arms, and the sight of those arms in the dim light caused him to believe he was attacked by a large ape and gave him a heart attack. And that's the story. Quite forgettable. The other thing is that it starts this trend in this magazine where a lot of stories are continued later on, and this is the first one of them. Next is The Jungle Beast, the story of a man who has just been discharged from a mental hospital. He talks about how he hated his grandmother's cat. Apparently the cat reciprocated these feelings. Eventually, we come to find out that they are both reincarnations. The cat of some sort of saber-toothed tiger, and the man of some prehistoric man who back then had lost his family to the saber-tooth. This rivalry between the two has been going on for millennia untold. It's kind of a neat story, but I think it could have been told a little bit better. The problem I feel is that most of the narrative is all about how this cat is odd and how it does weird things and the feelings it evokes in the man and so on. And then in the last page or so, we come to find out this whole reincarnation thing, which seems to come a bit out of nowhere. There isn't really any foreshadowing of this or any visions of previous lives or even a mention of previous lives that I recall. A little bit of a disappointing tale overall. Next, we have The Golden Caverns. which starts in the middle of the action. It concerns a group of adventurers who they have found information about some sort of lost civilization. They go explore this underground complex. It's trapped. It's got untold treasures in it. We can really see the kind of story that would eventually inspire the Indiana Jones movies. But at the very end, even though they managed to escape with their lives, any treasure they brought back is either gone or it's just gems which could have been had anywhere. So they can't prove to people what they found in that underground complex, that it exists. And they can't go back because somebody has accused them of a crime in the country. I believe it's Brazil. They will be arrested by the authorities, so they can't go back, but they can't prove its existence and convince someone else to go either. This was a fun, action-packed story, and I quite enjoyed it. Now we have A Vial of Insects. This story is about a man who's a drug smuggler. Essentially, what he does is on a designated night, he will row out in the dark to where the boat with the contraband has dropped the packages, which just float. They can't be seen from far away because it's night. But if you're close enough, you can find them in the moonlight. However, he'll be betrayed by a colleague of sorts and be arrested. The colleague is hoping to get his girl and also get the money. However, he will be pursued by a friend of the smuggler, a Chinese man who studies insects. He's a biologist of sort. He will introduce a bunch of insects from a vial in the betrayer's room. They will sting him. At first he thinks it's mosquitoes, but the welts become huge. He tries to go to a doctor to no avail. It doesn't seem to do much until eventually he dies. And thus, the dead smuggler is avenged. It's a fun little story, and I do like the illustration on it. The next story is called An Eye for an Eye. This is about a very miserly character who seems to own quite a bit of property in the town that he's in. And it starts with him evicting a young girl and her mom who is sick. The only place they can find is a small shack that is very drafty. Her mom will eventually die after a few weeks there because she was too sick to be moved to begin with, and her condition just worsened. We then cut back to the miser who is afraid of dying. Specifically, he's afraid because he's feeling his extremities becoming numb and being difficult to move. So he's worried that he would become paralyzed and that people would bury him still alive while he couldn't tell them he was still alive. And he will make arrangements with the local doctor that should he die, to have a cord attached to a bell go down into his coffin through a hole in the coffin, and also a tube to bring in air, two of them actually, so that there is some circulation possible, so that should he wake up in the coffin, he could ring the bell and warn people to please dig him out. It turns out that what he feared so much does happen. When he wakes up, he rings the bell, and eventually the sound of the bell stops. So when some people get to the grave, what happens is, first of all, they find that the air tube has been blocked. And second, they also find that the bell has been muted. They do see the bell move. They decide to dig, but by the time they get there, the man is dead. What people don't realize is the connection between the young lady who was evicted at the very start, whose body is found near the cemetery, and the death of the miser who caused her mother to die and her life to get so much worse. The next story is called The Floor Above. Concerns a man who gets a letter from an old classmate of his that he hasn't heard from in years, who asks him to come and that he's in a very bad way. So he decides to go to see his friend. Turns out he's in a rooming house. There's an old lady from whom his friend rents a room. His friend looks quite odd and sickly. Tries to convince him to go see a doctor, but the friend tells him, no, it's not going to work. In his bedroom is a door which he is told that he shouldn't open. A variety of odd things happen. And when eventually he does open the said door and take the stairs up to the room above, what he finds is the desiccated body of his friend writing the letter he received. Quite a moody piece. It was enjoyable. And this one also has an illustration, and this is one of the illustration that has a signature on it of Heitman. And we can see it's very much in the same style as all the others we've seen so far. This leads me to believe that all the illustrations were by that artist. Of course, I can't say definitively. The next story is called Penelope. In this story, Penelope is a planet that the protagonist claims will have unusual influence on his life, and when it reaches perihelion, its influence will be increased. And what will happen is that he will wake up and he will find that his furniture and stuff is on the ceiling. Even the door has been reversed. And eventually he realizes that for him personally, gravity has been reversed. So he's happy he wasn't outdoors when it happened. He will go out to explore the world a little bit and see what happens. And it turns out everyone else is unaffected. It's only him. He will have an encounter as he is hanging upside down from the fence near the building where he lives with a young lady that he will ask to see later on. She actually will agree, and they will eventually marry, and it turns out her name is also Penelope. A fun little story, an interesting concept. So the Purple Heart is not about the medal that American soldiers who are wounded or killed in battle receive, but it is about a man who is wandering around and is a bit lost and close to exhaustion when he comes across a cabin which seems abandoned, so he will enter it. In it, he will find an old man who tells him that not only can he spend the night, but he has no choice since he won't be able to leave. And it actually turns out so. The door behind him is closed and he cannot seem to get it open again. Some strange things are seen during the night, including a strange glowing purple heart, the one from the title. The next morning, the old man is gone and he can freely leave, and he runs across somebody else who tells him that the cabin is haunted and how an old man was murdered in that cabin 10 years ago, and he swore he'd come back on the anniversary of his death to lure somebody into the cabin. Feline is about a man who is very much a jerk, and he treats his partner very badly. She's quite miserable. She likes cats. He doesn't. And though she drops hints at one point, she just leaves him. The story draws a lot of parallels with the cat that she loves and herself. It's an okay story. It's well written, but it didn't do much for me. So 2 Hours of Death concerns a man who reads about the death of an old friend of his from school who had just spent 35 years in an asylum. He then reminisces about this friend who was into studying a lot of things, including the supernatural. Even though the main character doesn't really believe in things like that, they would sometimes discuss it. At one point, he gets a letter from him asking him to come tonight to my lab. I have something to show you. He explains that he has a drug that will make you as dead for a few hours and that it will allow you to experience the afterlife. The main character says, well, I'm not interested. And he says, well, it's too late because the drink I just gave you has some of that drug and you will experience it. And it turns out that one of the reasons to give him his drug, which does allow him to have an out-of-body experience, is as he does so, he witnesses his friend, who it turns out is jealous. He accuses him of marrying the only woman he ever loved. And he sees the person he thought was his friend go to a nearby desk, pull out a knife, and approach him. While out of his body, he will try to attempt to stop the person he thought was his friend from killing him with the knife, and somehow he realizes he's become visible. His attacker has seen him. His reaction to this sight is horrified, and that is apparently what has driven him to madness. And the narrator says, well, now that he is dead, I'm free to say why he became insane and what has happened. Even back then, I could not find any information on the drug that he had found that would allow you to have an out-of-body experience. And that is the end of the story. Another one of those stories where somebody recalls events that happened a long time ago and who writes down the events, and what we presumably read as the account of what happened to this character. Midnight Black concerns a woman who is having an affair, and in the middle of the night she hears noises. She believes it to be her lover, who for some reason has come to her house. Her husband is still upstairs working on some project of his. She was in bed, but she doesn't dare call him because if he opens the door of the room he's in, he'll be backlit and not be able to see what threatens him. She will hide in the dark. She doesn't know what to do. She's sort of frozen in place, half hidden. Her husband will come out. It turns out that it is not her lover. It is somebody breaking into the house. The story ends after the light is turned on and the husband has managed to defeat the intruder. She says, "Oh my God, it might have been." The husband misunderstands these words. She was, of course, referring to her lover. It might have been her lover. The husband says, "Yes, it might have been me, but luckily it's not. You're safe too, and I love you." And she sort of goes with the flow, and that's the end of the story. Another story with a not very pleasant character, if you ask me. Next, we have something new for Weird Tales, something they called Masterpieces of Weird Fiction. This is the first installment, and what it is, it's a reprint of a story that has been previously published. Now, this first one is The Haunted and the Haunters, or The House and the Brain. It's by Bulwer Lytton, or Lytton. It was originally published in 1859. As you might guess from the title, it is about a man who has a friend who tells him that he's discovered a haunted house in the middle of London. The narrator of the story is quite incredulous at that. The friend tells him how he rented a house, it was inexpensive, it suited him and his family, but after 3 days of all sorts of weird things happening, they decide to leave the house. This is when they find out that they're the ones who stayed the longest. Almost no one spent more than one night in the house. The narrator at this is quite curious and decides to approach the owner of the house, asks him if he could rent it short term for a night because he heard it was haunted. The man tells him that if you can find out what it is that's there, I will happily let you stay in the house for free. If you can let me be rid of this problem because I'm losing money on this house and it's a burden and nothing else. As it turns out, the narrator stays one night. Some supernatural things do seem to happen. What he does figure out, however, is that there's a small room that seems to be entirely closed off from the rest of the house. It turns out that a young boy died there because of neglect. He was an orphan. Some relatives adopted him. However, they totally neglected him because if they could get rid of him, they would inherit the fortune of his parents. The boy will die, and since then the house has been haunted. The narrator will convince the owner that the secret of this haunting is in this small room that's closed off. That's how they discover what happened. And since then the house has been exorcised. It is not haunted anymore, and people rent it and stay in it without any problems. Quite interesting choice for the first reprint. It's not a writer I'd heard about, but I really liked this story. Very sophisticated. It wasn't just one of those, oh my God, it's a ghost that has been there all along. It's very much a discussion of what makes things supernatural versus natural. The narrator is basically doing detective work on what could be the cause of all this. The cause is still supernatural, the ghost of the little boy. I quite like that story and I'm glad it was included. Next, we have the conclusion of The Whispering Thing, which was started in the previous issue. This had this French private detective investigating some strange murders where people said they were being attacked by some invisible thing. He actually witnessed it and it did appear that way. One of the victims who survived the attack, though none of the others did, is an international spy. He wasn't really attacked. What it was is that he had put some toxic powder on some bats and he would introduce the bat into the house of whoever he wanted to kill. So apparently the whispering thing and its cold breath is the noise of the bat and the air displaced by the flap of its wings. I didn't enjoy this one as much as the shorter tales in here. We'll leave it at that. The death cell concerns somebody who is an inmate in an asylum and is told by the doctor who apparently treats him. The patient is McKay. He is very good friends with Larson. Two different people, but very, very close. They're as brothers. McKay will become infatuated with a woman who's only there to exploit him, try and get his money. She doesn't care for him, though he has fallen for her. His friend Larson will try to get him out of this. He doesn't manage to. McKay will see him enter the house of the woman, and he believes that the reason Larson was trying to dissuade him from going out with the woman was that so he could do so himself. Enraged by this, he will go grab his gun and shoot his friend. He will then be arrested for murder and condemned to death. Now, they were part of a small, close-knit group, and the other three, after finding out that if someone is dead, they can be revived, they will arrange things so that they will revive him after the hanging. But when they do, it seems that Larson's personality has entered his body. Of course, the doctors believe that this is just insanity on McKay's part, that he believes to be Larson because of everything that happened. And that's the end of the story. An interesting one because it's very ambiguous. You actually really don't know at the end whether or not the mind of Larson has entered McKay's body after McKay was resuscitated, or if it's McKay who's just gone mad and believes now himself to be Larson. The devil plant is, well, how would you guess about a plant? The main character who narrates really dislikes someone when they were in school. The other one would do all sorts of shenanigans and got him blamed and eventually expelled. They lose touch. He does get a job, and there reappears this person who again ruins him. He's forced to leave England, go to the US, start his life over again. His nemesis shows up and ruins him. He will leave again, rebuild his life again in Australia. And his nemesis shows up. This time he takes the woman he loves. He finds a way to take his revenge, which is to entice his rival to come and see a plant, which is known as the devil plant and is quite deadly. While he tells him this is dangerous, the other one just accuses him of being a coward and wants to smell the plant, taste its nectar, which is apparently going to give you eternal life, but of course not. It turns out the plant is one of those carnivorous plants. You drink some of that nectar, you become drugged, you just stand still while the plant's leaves and tendrils would hold you prisoner, and you die, and then the plant eats you. A tale of revenge with a strange plant. Hooch is a very short story about a man who believes himself to be at the gallows. He's about to be hung. And just as the trapdoor opens and he's going to be killed, he's woken up by a shipmate who tells him that you had too much to drink, wake up. Blames the homemade hooch that he has drunk. A few paragraphs, it's not even half a page. That's it. Not much of a story, if you ask me. The mood setting is really great of the man going up to the scaffold and being hung. But then the conclusion is literally, it was all a dream, which by now we've seen a few too many times. Next story is The Thunder Voice. It's about a man who talks about stories his grandfather told him about the thunder voice, which is a very loud voice that could be heard at night in the wilds of northeastern Canada, caused by a malformed young man who, while physically deformed, is very large, very strong. The story concludes with the narrator discovering a skeleton, which could be the creature that had the thunder voice. It was an okay story, tightly written. Case number 27 is about a man who visits a friend of his who's a doctor in a psychiatric hospital, and he will present him a woman who killed her husband after both their children died in an accident. However, it turns out, no, she didn't, but she believes she did, and that is the madness, and she's incurable. That's really it. I don't really enjoy these tales of madness all that much, so we'll leave that one at that. So the finale is about an odd fellow that the narrator knows, who apparently has killed someone. It was found to be in self-defense, but the man is haunted by the green eyes of his victim. In order to not see them, everything in his house is green. He will confess what happened exactly, that it wasn't actually self-defense, that he did kill the man, and will die, and the friend will burn everything so that no one else would know what happened. I didn't really get into this story too much. Maybe it shows in this recap I did of it. So the closed cabinet concerns a young lady who will stay with some distant cousins. As it turns out, these cousins, the Mervyns, have a family curse, and the curse is that every generation, someone in that generation will bring shame to the family, and so far it's always happened. The room she's assigned to stay in is one where only family should stay, and it's the only room left because the house is full of guests. However, one of the other rules is that no unmarried woman should stay in this room, and she is unmarried. The room is known colloquially as the haunted room. Eventually, we'll find out there's been a murder there. The room also has a fancy cabinet that has been in the family for generations. It is said that once the cabinet is open, the curse will be lifted. However, no one wants to force it open because it's specific that it has to be properly open. If they were to break open the cabinet, then the curse would remain forever. There will be strange going-ons. She will sleep in the room the first night. She will hear a lot of strong winds, like a storm is happening. However, no one else has noticed this storm. The second night, again, she hears a lot of strong winds and a storm. The next morning, people disbelieve her. They think it was a dream she had or something. There's also a strange feeling she has when she's in the room. She doesn't really want to stay in the room. Eventually, she will find out what the family history behind the curse is, and she will be part of lifting the curse. I quite like this story. I don't think my recap does it justice. It's well written. It's not just a ghost. This idea of the curse, and they talk about the different generations, and the conclusion is quite satisfactory. The way the curse is lifted. It's hinted that a young woman can lift the curse, but it's unclear how. There are several ways it could be done, and the one that happens is quite satisfying. I like this story a lot. I think I said that before, but it bears repeating. So the Eerie ends this issue as usual, the usual letters column and editorializing. The next to last paragraph struck me, and it basically reads, "When we began writing the copy for this month's Eerie, we thought we'd end it with some pertinent remarks on a matter that has aroused our curiosity, to wit, the preponderance of cats and Chinamen in weird literature. But we'll have to let it go. No space. You'll find it in the Eerie for June, however." There are a lot of Asians that show up in these stories. Cats, not so much, at least so far. There was one story in this issue that did feature cats prominently, or a cat prominently. I'll have to go through it, but the other thing they don't mention that I feel shows up a lot are apes, monkeys, and ape men. So I'm going to start doing a score for each one of these issues at the end of my recaps, starting with this one. So the Moon Terror features a ancient secret Chinese cult. So yeah, clearly there, that's it. The Secret Fear features a man who's very afraid of apes and monkeys. There's a mention of a monkey that's escaped from somewhere. The monkey otherwise doesn't feature, but it's still there. Jungle Beasts features a cat. Vials of Insect features another Chinese protagonist, one of the good guys here. Feline, with a title like that, obviously features a cat. So that's the final score. 2 stories with cats, 1 with monkeys, 2 with Asians. We'll see how the other issues fare in the future. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at the May 1923 issue of Weird Tales, and I'll see you next time.